The aim of this brief talk this evening is to try and give you a 10-minute presentation over what it's taken me sort of 25 years to gather, and looking through the science of things. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and provide you with a background and some context and some science to then lead you to two aspects that in terms of your practice, in terms of your coaching opportunities, you either are using them or you would potentially then look to use these as opportunities, because they are well researched, and it actually just goes to show how important the science behind the coaching can be. And if we are using science and we're practically applying it, then it becomes a very, very powerful mechanism. So the take home from here is to give you a little bit of a background, and then ultimately to lead you to two coaching practices which are I think are fundamental to our current coaching practice. So just to start with, and it's a very basic or simplistic diagram, but anytime we move, movement is decided by three things: the perception, the decision, and then the action. And obviously on each one of these phases, there are important aspects that we need to be aware of. In the stimulus identification, obviously there's things like sight, there's movement capacities, but very much that's a sensory information, and the body, before it moves, has to rely on sensory information that's coming into the system, and the system is the brain and the central nervous system. Once that information hits the brain, it has to then make decisions. The more information it gets, the more practice it gets at those particular perceptions or the stimuli, the better the decision can be. And I think it's important to recognize that as much stimulus as we get, the decision can then be even finer. And the way that our bodies learn is that if in a practice session we are providing more and more stimuli, the brain is able to refine the decision more and more and more, ultimately then to produce the action. And that's sort of where the arrow becomes a lot smoother and a lot more sharp towards the back end. So we want really lots of information coming into the person, coming into the system at the beginning. We want lots of information, lots of stimuli. The brain then can make a decision, and then ultimately we emit an action or a response. So let's just look at them. So what does it mean to have a skilled performance? And skilled performance from a scientific perspective deals with three things. Firstly, it's the reduced time taken to achieve a goal. It's having maximum certainty, and then to conserve energy. So the reduced time to achieve a goal, again, I don't know if any of you watched the Champions League semi-final last night, and you watch footballers playing at such a high level, and it just looks like they have the ability to perceive things, to integrate the information, and then similarly then to provide a response and an action. And I don't know if any of you are footballers out there, but if you go and try and do these things, it doesn't happen quickly. Your body feels that it should be doing something, but the difference, or the distance, should I say, between what goes on in your brain, or what you see, what goes on in the brain, to what ultimately comes out in your legs is quite long. And I think what we see in performance here, we always talk about those athletes, those elite athletes, they seem to have lots of time, because the speed at which they can make decisions allows them that time to refine movements from there. So we then talk about maximum certainty, and again, I can use a cricket example, if you don't mind. AB de Villiers is a South African batsman, and when you watch him play cricket, or you watch him do any type of skill, he does it with certainty. So whether it's a defensive shot, whether it's an aggressive shot, whether it's to try and avoid the ball, whatever he does it with maximum certainty. You never see him worrying about it or being apprehensive. Similarly, in a lot of contact sports, we understand that injury will happen if you go into a contact situation and you're apprehensive and you're a little bit nervous and you're not providing that maximum certainty. And the third one is one where we conserve energy. And again, this is one that we see when players are tired, when players are overworked, or they're going into an environment or into a game situation or competitive situation where they're not fresh. And over a period of time, they don't conserve enough energy. So what we see here from a skilled performance, we have three aspects. Sometimes in certain individuals, they get one better than the other. So in some instances, our ability to conserve energy is way better than our ability to reduce the time taken to achieve the goal. But if we're looking at skilled performance and we're wanting our players to perform better, Those are the three aspects that we really need to look at. All right, so just in terms of acquiring motor skills, and please, in this, you could take acquiring motor skills out, and you could say being able to kick a football, being able to hit a ball, be able to catch a ball. You could look at this at being any technical skill, so to speak. The first aspect that happens is that we need to repeat these skills in different environments, and I've just called those open and closed chain environments. So an open and a closed chain environment is very often just changing environments. And sometimes an open environment is an environment where you don't actually know what the outcome is going to be. So you throw a ball at a person and it bounces awkwardly. It's an open environment. The individual or the player has to make a decision based on what they see in front. I think what's important at this stage is just to mention, firstly, you don't see a breaking down of the movement. So you don't see us learning motor skills by breaking it down into various components. Like we would do in mechanics, we talk about a stance phase, then a leg swing, then a follow-through phase or a contact phase. We don't see that happening here. So again, it's just important to remember that. The second thing that we don't see here is we don't see modeling. I'm not mentioning in this first point here, I'm not mentioning modeling. And when I say modeling, I'm mentioning that because in a lot of our coaching books, a lot of our coaching manuals, we get to model behavior. So we see how the professionals do it, we see how the elites do it, and what we do is we get told that's the way you do that particular shot. What that doesn't take into account, it doesn't take into account the different environments that we have. It doesn't take into account the individual nature of that person. I guarantee you now, Rafael Nadal can hit a forehand as a left-handed player way differently to me, way stronger than me, even if my arms were the same length as his, because his environment is different. And I think what we've got to do here is we've got to move away from those coaching manuals where they model behavior. So once we've provided the individual with repeated opportunities to practice this environment in different ways, that information is then transferred to the central nervous system. All right. And as I said at the beginning, we've got this perception, which is a lot of information, and that perception then comes in to where we start making decisions. And that's what happens at the central nervous system. That central nervous system is like it's like your computer. It starts to work out. It starts to work out algorithms as to how it should work. What is the best way of doing this? What are the movements? If this happens and the ball bounces awkwardly, what's my response? What do I need to activate to then achieve the right response? And over time, these structured or conditioned registers become motor patterns. And the most important thing here, these motor patterns need to be elastic. And I'm going to use the word elastic as opposed to plastic. An elastic band is something that can mold, can malleable, it's movable, it's changeable. And we have a term for it in the sciences, in the coaching sciences, we call it functional variability. So what you're wanting to do is you want each player to have this variability in the technical ability that deals with the environment in which they're in. And that becomes vitally important. And then lastly here we have repetition. And repetition transforms those patterns into independent neurophysiological units. And when we say repetition, it is also about repetition at a raced pace, game-based type of scenario. Because if we move into the medical sciences and the sports sciences, we understand that specificity in training, in terms of the speed of movement, in terms of the motor recruitment, the neural patterning, is very different at a slow speed versus a high speed. All right, so just to look a little bit more closely at some of those environments in terms of acquiring those motor skills. So when we look at the science tells us that when we are developing these skill-based techniques, we deal with information from a variety of aspects. So again, in our coaching practices, we can look at internal environments, we can look at external environments from the player's perspective. We must combine all senses. And again, in coaching practice, there's that tell, show, do scenario where you tell them to do it, you show them how to do it, and they engage in it. What we are finding very, very successful nowadays is actually if you're acquiring a new skill, you go through more of a cognitive process. So you actually sit down with your player and you get them to understand it cognitively, mentally. How does it mean? Actually get them to engage with the process, get their minds working so they fully understand it. And then on the right-hand side, we've got visual auditory, and that's all those coaching skills that we get taught in coaching courses. And we talk about, right, so now we've got to tell them, we've got to show them, we've got to remind them, we've got to motivate them. And this is how we do it. This is how we acquire motor skills, to utilize all of these. So I just want to go briefly into an internal and external environments, just to give you an idea of how just you can then open up those two environments and add even more to that. And I think it's important when we're looking at this that players and individuals, and especially children, learn by incident, not only by directed play. So when we are feeling we're having a teaching moment, which may be an external moment, so they're learning from the verbal cues that we're giving them, we can't negate the fact that internally, if that athlete or that player is not feeling comfortable and they're not recognized, or they don't understand the sound that it makes or the feeling that it made on their hands, I think we're going to lose them. So what I'm going to say here is that if we're wanting to work both the internal and external environment, whatever practices we have, whatever drills we do, needs to take all of that into consideration. Okay, so here we get to the rub of what I wanted to get to. So I want to just highlight that coaching science as a discipline in sport is as important, if not more important, than both exercise science and medical science. And I do feel up until now, both medical science and exercise science has dominated sport. And I think it's a sleeping giant. I think coaching science and the science of coaching, especially when it comes to technical aspects, particularly when it comes to performance improvements, is a sleeping giant. And I think if we just embrace the science a little bit more, we would then understand the importance of it. So I just want to introduce two topics, and these are my take-home messages, and I want to just go through those very briefly for you. So let's just understand pattern and performance recall. So if we take into consideration everything that I've spoken about now about perception, decision, action, about motor skills, about being elastic and having this functional variability, the concept of pattern versus performance recall plays right into that. And these are practices or exercises or drills that focuses on patterns of movement as opposed to just performance of the movement. Okay, so again, if I use last night's soccer as an example, all of those players look like they have wonderful concept and idea of where everybody is. But if you watch them, before they get the ball, that 2 or 3 seconds before they get the ball, they lift their heads up, they scan the environment, they look around, they know where their players are, they are assessing movement, they are getting stimuli, then they receive the ball. They then have to make a decision very quickly. And what they've done in their practice sessions, they are practicing that pattern of movement. They don't only worry about the performance, they practice the pattern of movement. And that's something that I wanted to focus on. So really focus on the pattern of movement as opposed to the performance. The second part, which is actually just an add-on to that, is an approach called chunking, or a game-based approach. And what this basically does is it chunks movements, it chunks techniques, it chunks various parts of the game into bite sizes. And what it allows the individual to do, it allows them to work on those strategies and those skills. And it creates the technical with the tactical, with the physical, with the speed and everything else. And it's a way of chunking. So what you do is you include all of those environments, the internal, the external, the combining all the senses, and you're allowing the athlete the best opportunity to learn the movement or to learn the tactic or the technique that you're looking to do. So game-based approach, otherwise called chunking, or performance versus pattern recall. Those are the two take-home messages from me for this evening.